Hello everybody, welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, where today I am having a look at politics in general in the UK. There have been some developments since I last covered UK politics, particularly in the wake of the local elections in May. There was a by-election in Scotland, which Labour surprisingly won, but I'm just going to have a look at some more broader trends and issues that have arisen since then. And we'll have a look at the latest nowcast model as well. So as we can see by Wikipedia's graphical summary, it looks like the Tory and the Labour vote appears to have bottomed out, sort of in the late mid-teens for the Tories and the low to mid-20s for Labour, and Reform seem to have peaked in the early 30s, and they're sort of settling in around the late 20s as well. So still leading pretty much every poll, but it does appear they've peaked for the moment. The Lib Dems and the Greens fairly flat. So if we have a look at some of the specific polls, YouGov had a couple of pretty tight prints, only a 2-point lead to Reform twice, but that's ballooned back out to 6 points here. This Find Out Now poll looks like a bit of an outlier, but generally the Reform lead is between sort of 2 and 7 or 8, and that's relatively consistent with their vote either side of 30. Labour's vote sort of either side of, I guess, 23, 24. There was a few polls where the Tories were in behind the Lib Dems in 4th place, but it appears that they've kind of stabilised just above the Lib Dems for the moment. So the first development happens on the left side of politics, where Jeremy Corbyn and a Labour MP who's recently left the party haven't actually formally announced anything, I believe, but it appears that they might be registering a new party, which I guess would sort of form the sort of socialist left part of Labour, kind of in line with where Jeremy Corbyn was taking the party back in 2019, but also somewhat in alliance with a few of the pro-Palestine independent MPs who were elected in 2024. So I'm not sure if it's going to be an official party or like more of a loose collective, or if it's going to even be a thing at all. But this poll from Find Out Now, which could be a pretty dodgy sample, because I think it must come from this one, which had the Reform vote up on 34%, Labour on 21%. But you can see the numbers here are pretty stark. It's got the Tories coming second to Reform, 17% behind, and the Corbyn party and the Labour Party equal on third with 15% of the vote each. And they're obviously taking quite a bit of vote from both the Lib Dems and the Greens, this new Corbyn party. So that's quite interesting. Look, if this really does get up, there's going to have to be a lot of tactical voting on the left come 2029. But we'll keep an eye on those developments. Also, on the right, it appears that the Richard Lowe, the ex-Reform MP, he has put together this Restore Britain movement, which is a cross-parliamentary or cross-party kind of loose organisation of, I suppose, grassroots members, but he's hoping to also attract elected MPs, I think. And it's pretty sort of far-right stuff. But it does appear that at one point, perhaps, Nigel Farage did have something close to a pretty big sweeping umbrella over anything to the right of the Tories, but that appears to be fragmenting, as some of my commenters were mentioning that it could well do. I'm not surprised, but we'll see how this develops. It does look as if, we did notice that the Reform vote appeared to have peaked maybe a month or two ago, and perhaps some of this fragmentation that's happening on the right could be influencing that. At the same time, the Tories, I think under Kemi Badenoch, probably won't be able to recover their position much. But if they were to move to another leader, there are sort of slightly more kind of hardline conservative figures within the party who might take over, and that could lead to a recovery in the Tory vote from their right flank, with the Lib Dems sort of constantly nibbling at their left flank. So that could be, an interesting development that might occur over the next sort of couple of years. The other thing that's happened to Reform recently is one of their MPs suspended himself from the party owing to some allegations and an investigation from the Times over his business affairs during the pandemic era. So Reform are back down to 4 MPs. I think they've had 2 defections and 1 by-election win. So some internal strife there, but it's not just Reform facing internal strife. We had a couple of weeks ago a bit of a backbencher rebellion against Keir Starmer. He was looking to make quite a few savings for the budget in welfare payments, but there was a backbencher revolt and he had to renege on that, leaving Rachel Reeves with very little room to move in order to maintain the UK's fiscal position. Any savings that they were hoping to make basically aren't going to happen now. And there was sort of a brief threat to his leadership, but the speculation is growing that there's going to be an increase in taxes, and a lot of ministers and frontbenchers are basically struggling to communicate exactly who is going to pay these taxes. And we're hearing sort of phrases like modest incomes and that sort of thing from these MPs trying to reassure people that they're not going to get hit hard by any tax hikes, but it's not looking good, and a lot of people are quite concerned. There was brief speculation that backbench rebellion could threaten Starmer's leadership, but looking at the bookies, it appears that he's still favourite to retain the leadership until the election year. So putting that all together, the latest nowcast, I'm not sure when this was updated, but it has Reform on 291 seats, easily the biggest party in Parliament, and with the Conservatives on 40, that would allow Reform to govern in coalition with the Conservatives. You can see Labor down massively to 159, the Lib Dems up 8 from the election, the SNP continuing their recovery, Plaid Cymru as well, taking a couple of extra seats in Wales. When we have a look at the map, you can see the SNP obviously, as has been the case for quite a while, doing very well in Scotland. Reform actually winning in Aberdeenshire. I might just zoom out on this map a little bit so it's a bit easier to see. There we go. But you can see it's the same old story. Northeast England, all the way through the Midlands, Reform dominant, making big gains in southern Wales as well. Although if you look at some of these seats, there's a lot of vote splitting between Plaid Cymru and Labour. So I'm keen to see what happens in the Welsh election early next year, and whether or not there's some tactical voting between Plaid Cymru and Labour in order to keep Reform out. Because you can see in some of these seats, Reform winning with 28% of the vote, but over 40% of the vote going to a combination of Plaid Cymru and Labour. So there could well be some tactical voting that would deny Reform extra seats there. You can see the Lib Dems still dominant in the south, where they've really routed the Tories. So many of these seats, you can see the 19 is blue, the 24 is orange. But Reform coming round to London, you can see Reform still doing very well in Kent and Essex, and then up into Norfolk as well. So, yeah, still Reform in quite a dominant position in terms of the polling and the potential electoral landscape. However, facing headwinds in terms of their own kind of internal affairs. But it seems not many parties are spared internal strife, particularly the Labour Party with their backbencher revolt and the potential for a new party from the Jeremy Corbyn wing of the Labour Party. So that's all I really have to say today. Please, if you're enjoying the content and you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. I cover Anglosphere elections, mostly Australia, but I do try to get round and keep an eye on Canada, the US, and New Zealand and the UK as well. And if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like, and of course I'd love to hear your comments, particularly if you live in the UK. You might have or you almost certainly would have picked up on stuff that I haven't, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts at a more local level as well. So thanks everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.